in my eyes, in my brain.
Bill Murray, though.
Hello? Yeah.
The best.
I know, but I think of her in the window.
Oh yeah, looking out.
It happened in seconds, so quickly that even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if the moment itself knew it was about to become a fault line running straight through Hollywood's carefully polished surface. And yet the shock that followed felt like the kind of silence that only comes when truth finally slips past years of restraint. For almost a decade, Dakota Johnson had mastered the art of elegant silence, the kind that is neither weakness nor avoidance but a deliberate act of self-protection, especially whenever her name was woven, stitched, or forced into the narrative surrounding Jamie Dornan and his wife, Amelia Warner. She had politely absorbed years of speculation, gracefully dodged invasive questions about the 50 Shades phenomenon, and maintained a composure so steady that journalists simultaneously admired her poise and resented her refusal to fuel their favorite storyline. But this time, she didn't smile. This time, she didn't deflect. This time, she said something that made the room freeze, that made the audience lean forward, that made the host blink as though he just touched a live wire. The interview itself had begun innocently. Dakota was promoting her latest project, sitting beneath the warm, flattering lights of a talk show set. The host perched opposite her with the kind of overeager curiosity that suggested he had every intention of pushing beyond the boundaries of professionalism. Then came the question people had whispered about for years, but which no one had ever dared ask so bluntly on live television. Do you ever talk to Jamie Dornan's wife? You two were, after all, quite close during those films. And in the instant that followed, the air in the studio changed, tightened, stilled. Dakota didn't react with indignation or offense. Instead, her eyes briefly flickered with something far more complex. Exhaustion, perhaps, or the quiet ache of someone who has carried a burden quietly for far too long. She let out the faint's, most ironic laugh before answering with a calmness that felt almost surgical in its precision. Some people hide behind the word love to control someone else's life. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt physical. The host stiffened, the audience shifted uncomfortably, and Dakota's gaze didn't waver. Not away, not upward, not inward. She didn't name Amelia, but she didn't need to. Within minutes, social media erupted in the kind of wildfire frenzy that only celebrity conflict can ignite. Tweets multiplied by the thousands. Did Dakota just call out Jamie's wife? What did Amelia do? Finally, she speaks. The clip circulated worldwide, gaining millions of views in mere hours, splitting timelines into battlegrounds of speculation and heated commentary. But to understand why those few words struck such a nerve, one had to rewind back to the origin, back to the unexpected storm born from the early days of 50 Shades of Grey. From the beginning, Dakota and Jamie's chemistry had been undeniable. Not just the physicality required by the script, but the emotional rawness they brought to scenes that demanded not only vulnerability but trust. It was a strange kind of intimacy, forged not in romance but in professionalism, in the understanding that their characters' connection needed to feel real for the films to work at all. Dakota once said, "We trusted each other completely. That's the only way something like that works." And she meant it. Their dynamic wasn't illicit. It was human, born out of mutual respect and the intense, isolating nature of filming a project that the world had already judged before cameras ever rolled. But while audiences saw a magnetic pairing on screen, the off-screen reality was tangled in the complexities of fame, perception, and timing. Jamie had recently married Amelia Warner, a private, soft-spoken artist who had always shied away from the spotlight. When 50 Shades exploded into global fame, it carried with it a tidal wave of headlines, most fixated not on the film's artistic merit but on the palpable connection between its two leads. And whether fairly or not, Amelia's silence became a canvas on which fans painted their own narratives. Some interpreted her quiet dignity as quiet disapproval. Others believed she had drawn unspoken boundaries that Jamie was expected to honor. Every time Dakota spoke warmly about Jamie, every time they shared a laugh during press tours, gossip sites twisted it into a supposed betrayal, a triangle, an emotional battlefield that existed far more in tabloids than in reality. For years, Dakota weathered it with remarkable grace. She never denied her friendship with Jamie, never defended herself against the insinuations, never contributed fuel to the fire. Instead, she carried the weight of public perception like an invisible burden, often framed as the outsider, the interloper, the uninvited thread in someone else's perfect narrative. Meanwhile, Amelia, quiet, artistic, dignified, became untouchable, the symbol of poise, the saintly figure conveniently placed in the background of a story that was never truly hers. It was as if the world had written its script and expected Dakota to perform her designated role indefinitely. And perhaps for a long time she had. But that single sentence, "Some people hide behind the word love to control someone else's life," was different. It was not a jab, not a petty remark, not a moment of impulsivity. It was the culmination of years of pent-up frustration, a quiet truth sharpened into a single, devastating line. Insiders began whispering that Dakota had grown tired. Tired of being portrayed as the complication. Tired of carrying blame for a past she didn't author. Tired of her silence being mistaken for guilt. "She's been silent for too long," a close friend allegedly revealed. "She feels like her side of the story was never heard. Like everyone assumed she was the villain when all she ever did was her job." As the interview clip spread, Hollywood insiders dissected every syllable with the kind of obsessive scrutiny usually reserved for political scandals. Some praised Dakota, calling her courageous for finally speaking up. Others criticized her, accusing her of disrespecting Amelia, a woman who, despite public perception, had also endured scrutiny, rumors, and emotional strain. The divide was instant and vicious. Hashtags flooded the internet. Hashtag Team Dakota, hashtag Team Amelia. Entire comment sections split into factions arguing over implications, motivations, histories no one fully understood. And caught in the crossfire once again was Jamie Dornan. He remained silent at first, filming overseas, unaware that his name was dominating every entertainment headline. One outlet summarized the situation with a pointed headline: "Jamie Dornan trapped between two women again." A line dripping with irony, insinuation, and a reminder of how often he had been placed in the center of narratives he didn't fully control. But Dakota didn't retract her words. She didn't issue a clarification statement. She didn't post a Notes app apology. She simply attended her next press junket, her expression calm yet distant, the look of someone who had finally chosen to stop participating in a story spun by others. Those who knew her recognized that calmness not as detachment but as a form of self-possession. A steady reclaiming of agency after years of being forced into silence by an industry that thrives on spectacle. By the end of the week, the world waited with morbid curiosity. Would Amelia respond? Would Jamie finally break his silence? Would this become yet another chapter in the long-running triangle of tension that had shadowed them since the first film? Because this time, Dakota's words had sliced deeper. They weren't gossip. They weren't pettiness. They weren't the idle remark of a celebrity tired of interviews. They were a declaration. A signal that behind the smiles, the red carpet photos, the choreographed politeness, there lived a story long suppressed. One shaped by unspoken boundaries, misunderstood loyalties, emotional nuance, and the unseen weight carried by those who spend years being miscast in the narrative of their own lives. Dakota's sentence didn't create the tension. It merely exposed it, pulling back a curtain that Hollywood had politely pretended wasn't there. And whether Amelia would ever speak, whether Jamie would ever address the storm swirling around him, or whether the world would simply continue rewriting its own version of events, one thing had finally irrevocably changed. Dakota Johnson, after nearly a decade of silence, had spoken, and in doing so, she had shifted the story from whispered speculation to undeniable truth, leaving Hollywood to grapple with the reality that beneath every polished facade, every carefully maintained relationship, every unspoken rule of celebrity diplomacy, lies a human story far more complicated, vulnerable.
Me, and all under Dad's sort of plan. And then he decided to go on like a day trip with my sisters to visit this really...
For the first time in years, Dakota Johnson had reached a quiet, internal threshold, the kind of point where a person realizes they have carried far more than they were ever meant to, and she decided she was done keeping the burden to herself, done letting other people twist silence into storylines, and done allowing her stillness to be interpreted as guilt. The clip from her interview hadn't even finished airing before headlines detonated across the internet, multiplying like sparks in dry grass. Dakota Johnson attacks Jamie Dornan's wife, screamed one outlet desperate for clicks, while another declared Hollywood frozen by Dakota's explosive comment, and within a matter of hours Dakota's measured, almost serene sentence had spiraled into the largest storm she'd faced since the initial chaos of 50 Shades. But while the world dissected motives, hunted villains, and argued over whether she was cruel, careless, or finally courageous, the woman silently positioned at the center of the speculation, Amelia Warner, said nothing at all in silence. Especially in the entertainment world, where even a sigh becomes a headline, has a way of echoing louder than a shouted denial. The next day Amelia was photographed leaving a small cafe in London, her head down beneath a knitted scarf, her expression unreadable in that careful, composed way that women married to famous men often learn to perfect, and tabloids zoomed aggressively into the image of her hand, analyzing the angle of her wedding ring, debating if it glinted the same way it usually did, as if metal alone could reveal the state of a marriage. Sources close to the family, eager for their moment in the press, told conflicting stories. Some claimed Amelia was furious, others insisted she was hurt but understanding, and a few whispered that she had simply grown tired of the narrative overshadowing her private life. But behind all the noise, people genuinely close to Jamie painted a different picture entirely. One, not of scan or betrayal but of exhaustion, emotional and otherwise. "He's trying to protect both of them," said a friend quietly, someone who had been beside him through the whirlwind of unexpected global fame. "He loves Amelia, he always has, but he understands Dakota more than anyone realizes. He's caught in a story he never meant to write, let alone star in." For Dakota herself, the remark that ignited the controversy had never been crafted to stir trouble, spark clicks, or feed rumors. If anything, it was a release, a kind of emotional exhale she had avoided for nearly a decade, because for years she had lived under the shadow of a narrative she couldn't control, one that grew larger and more distorted every time she appeared beside Jamie, every time she laughed during an interview, every time her face softened at the mention of his name. The world turned those natural human reactions into betrayal, projecting fantasies onto a woman who had simply been doing her job, and over time she became the easy target, the outsider blamed for emotions that weren't hers to begin with. So when she finally spoke, she didn't name Amelia, she didn't cast blame. She simply allowed the truth inside her to rise to the surface, tired and unpolished, and when a journalist later caught up with her outside a studio days after the storm began, Dakota's tone was measured, even gentle, yet the gravity in her voice was unmistakable. "I never said anyone's name," she remarked calmly. "But if the shoe fits, maybe it's time someone asks why." It wasn't arrogance. It was a weary kind of honesty, the kind that comes from years spent being polite while carrying the weight of a misunderstanding that everyone else had the privilege to ignore. For nearly a decade, she'd been painted as the flirt, the boundary breaker, the woman who couldn't maintain professional distance, the intruder in a marriage that wasn't hers, and yet the truth behind the scenes was so much less dramatic and infinitely more human. Dakota had been navigating an artistic partnership built on trust, emotional vulnerability, and the demands of a film series that required intimacy most actors never need to negotiate, and it was a dynamic the outside world misunderstood entirely. And perhaps Amelia did too, not intentionally, but through the prism of public scrutiny, where imagination often replaces reality. Industry insiders began piecing together a more intricate story, recalling details from the 50 Shades years that had resurfaced only in whispers. How Amelia had deliberately kept her distance from the production, skipping premieres, turning down red carpet appearances, and declining interviews about the films not because she was jealous, but because she needed to protect her mental and emotional well-being. As one producer explained, "Imagine watching the person you love become an international fantasy symbol, desire objectified, dissected, consumed. You'd try to preserve your peace too." But as Jamie's fame increased, so did Dakota's quiet resentment. Not toward him, but toward the relentless whispers following her from press tour to press tour, audition to audition. Directors hesitated to cast her, afraid her presence would bring tabloid baggage, Interviewers tied her name so tightly to Jamie's that her own work disappeared beneath his shadow, and every attempt to define her own identity was buried under the spectacle the world insisted on reviving. Slowly, silently, the weight of that erasure hardened inside her into something sharper, something that refused to stay silent forever, and when she finally let it out, her words landed with the force of someone who had simply stopped caring about protecting the feelings of people who had never protected hers. Her comment wasn't a weapon. It was a confession, a recognition that when your truth is continually buried beneath someone else's narrative, eventually it claws its way out, no matter who is startled by its arrival. As debates raged online, Jamie Dornan eventually resurfaced at a film festival, looking visibly older in the way only emotional fatigue can age a person, and he offered a succinct, composed statement. "I think everyone's misunderstood what was said. Dakota has always been a friend to me and to my family. We've shared something rare, and we all deserve kindness." His words didn't extinguish the fire, but they redirected it, shifting the public's gaze away from blame and toward humanity, toward the messy, complicated truth beneath the glossy surface of fame. Behind closed doors, Amelia reportedly reached out to Dakota privately. Not through agents or lawyers, but directly, woman to woman, acknowledging years of tension fame had twisted into myth, and though no one knows exactly what was said, those close to them hinted that something resembling closure had begun, a softening of edges that had been sharp for far too long. Weeks later, Dakota returned to the red carpet for a film premiere, where reporters shouted questions at her in the familiar frenzy, hoping for fuel, for another line to keep the story alive. But she simply smiled, paused, and replied with a quiet conviction. "I don't hate anyone. I just stopped pretending everything was fine." And in that moment, the entire narrative circled back to its simplest truth. Not another scandal, not another accusation, but the quiet courage of a woman who had finally chosen herself. In Hollywood, where words are currency and silence is often strategy, it is easy to forget that silence can also become a prison, and Dakota Johnson had merely found a way to break hers, even if doing so meant shaking the carefully constructed illusions people preferred to believe. As for Amelia and Jamie, life appeared to settle slowly, gently, as paparazzi later captured them walking together in London, sharing soft laughter, as though the storm had finally passed, or at the very least made room for honesty. Perhaps, for the first time, the truth, raw, uncomfortable, and undeniably human, had cleared the air rather than clouded it, leaving behind something quieter, something real. And in the end, Dakota's so-called harsh words weren't an attack at all, but a reminder that even in an industry built entirely on illusion, curated narratives, and public perception, honesty, especially the kind that emerges from years of internal restraint, still has the power to shock, to soften, and to set someone free. For the first time in years, Dakota Johnson decided she was finished carrying the weight of a story she had never asked to be part of. And the moment her interview clip aired, the internet erupted with the kind of frenzy only Hollywood controversies seem capable of creating. Headlines screamed that she had attacked Jamie Dornan's wife, Amelia Warner, while others painted her as the spark that had frozen the industry in shock. Yet beneath the noise, Dakota remained astonishingly calm, as if she had finally surrendered to a truth she had kept buried for far too long. Amelia's silence, in contrast, became its own narrative, magnified by paparazzi photographs capturing her leaving a cafe in London, head down, wedding ring scrutinized as though its position alone could reveal the inner workings of her marriage. Whispers from supposed insiders offered contradicting interpretations, some insisting Amelia was furious, others claiming she was simply hurt, and a few suggesting she was exhausted by years of speculation herself. Meanwhile, those genuinely close to Jamie spoke of a man stretched thin, desperate to protect both the woman he married and the colleague who had been unfairly tied to him for a decade, acknowledging quietly that he understood Dakota far more than the world realized. For Dakota, her comment had not been designed to stir scandal. It was a weary release after years of being miscast as the flirt, the interloper, the woman who lacked boundaries, when in truth she had merely been navigating a demanding creative partnership that required trust, vulnerability, and emotional transparency. Elements the public frequently misinterpreted as something more. Amelia, on her part, had distanced herself from the 50 Shades universe not out of jealousy, but self-preservation, unwilling to expose herself to the emotional toll of watching her husband become the center of a global fantasy, while Dakota struggled under the weight of a narrative she could never correct. Her professional identity overshadowed by rumors, assumptions, and journalists who refused to let her exist outside Jamie's orbit. Years of silence hardened inside her, turning into a truth too heavy to keep hidden. And when she finally voiced it, people mistook honesty for hostility. Jamie's eventual public comment, calm and compassionate, served not to exacerbate the fire, but to humanize the situation, reminding the world that the three of them were real people entangled in a story shaped more by public imagination than reality. Behind the scenes, Amelia reached out to Dakota privately, and though no one knows what passed between them, those closest suggested that long-needed clarity finally took place. When Dakota later appeared on a red carpet and simply said, "I just stopped pretending everything was fine," it marked the quiet end of a narrative that had outlived its truth. In an industry built on illusion, her honesty, raw, tired, and deeply human, became its own form of freedom. For the first time, Dakota Johnson finally let go of the silence she had carried for years, and the moment her interview clip aired, the media exploded with headlines claiming she had attacked Jamie Dornan's wife, Amelia Warner. Yet behind the noise, the truth was far more human. Amelia was photographed in London the next day, her quiet demeanor fueling speculation, while insiders offered conflicting accounts of her emotions. Those close to Jamie described